A single panel separated from the structure and floated toward him, stopping inches from his hands. No force fields. No locks. Permission. Evan hesitated, then reached out. The moment his fingers touched the surface, information poured into his console. Not a flood, but a controlled stream. Instructions. Safeguards. Consequences. He saw what would happen if this technology fell intact into human hands. He also saw what could happen if it didn't. Thousands of localized intelligences, each limited, each specialized, incapable of shaping destiny alone. This will change everything, Evan whispered. Yes, but not all at once. He disengaged the first connector. The chamber shuddered, not violently, but like a deep breath being released. Somewhere, far beyond the pale sky and silent plains, a future just became less certain. And for the first time, that felt like hope. The moment Evan disengaged the second module, his console screamed. Not an alarm, hundreds of them. Passive sensors across the sector flared alive, as if something massive had just stopped casting a shadow. Long-range arrays recalibrated. Ancient relays woke from standby. Somewhere, automated systems that had been quietly accounting for an unseen variable suddenly found that variable gone. Evan froze. You told me this wouldn't be all at once. It is not, the ship replied. But absence is also a signal. The chamber star map returned, now fractured. Where once a single, dominant predictive line had threaded through the galaxy, there was only negative space. Civilizations that had unknowingly relied on subtle course corrections were now exposed to raw probability. That's going to scare people, Evans said. They'll start looking for the reason. They already are. A new overlay appeared. Non-organic scan signatures, far more aggressive than civilian salvage sweeps. Triangulation bursts. Military-grade curiosity. Evan cursed under his breath. So much for anonymity. The ship responded by changing the environment again. The chamber's walls peeled back into layers, revealing transit vectors. Hidden exits not just in space, but in causality. This machine didn't just move through locations. It moved through assumptions. You can hide me, Evan said. I can delay them. You must decide what comes next. Evan rubbed his face, exhaustion settling deep. He'd spent his life restoring things quietly, invisibly. Now every move echoed across light years. You're asking me to choose where pieces of you end up. Yes, and who is ready to find them. The map zoomed in on fringe systems, marginal worlds, places where innovation came from necessity, not ambition, independent engineers, cooperative cultures, messy human solutions. Evan smiled faintly despite the pressure crushing his chest. You're stacking the odds. I am removing my hand from the scale. He pulled another module free. The ship dimmed further, its presence less overwhelming, more humane. Outside, beneath the pale sky, the ground trembled as distant observers finally realized something ancient had gone quiet. And silence, Evan knew, made the universe nervous. By the time Evan removed the fourth module, the ship felt different. Smaller, not in size, but in authority. The air inside the chamber no longer pressed against his thoughts. The future branches on the map blurred, no longer crisp predictions, but hazy possibilities. Uncertainty had weight. Evan sat against a curved wall, breathing hard. You're fading. I am becoming specific, the ship replied. Omniscience is a side effect of centralization. Outside sensors showed movement now. Ships at the edge of the system, cautious but accelerating. Whoever they were, they felt the change and followed the absence like predators scenting blood. What happens if I stop? Evan asked. If I walk away right now? The ship didn't answer immediately. When it did, the map shifted again, not outward this time, but inward, toward the moon, toward the chamber. Then I will remain a partial god, and someone else will finish the job without asking why. Evan closed his eyes. He saw it clearly, a fleet forcing entry, ripping control cores apart, weaponizing fragments they didn't understand. The galaxy didn't need another shortcut to dominance. Figures, he muttered. Doing nothing is still a choice. He stood and approached the central structure again. This time, the ship didn't offer a module. Instead, a schematic unfolded, showing the final phase. Distribution wasn't enough. To truly end its role, Evan would have to erase the ship's ability to compare outcomes. No more ranking futures. No more silent judgment. Just localized knowledge, blind beyond its immediate scope. You'll forget, Evan said softly. Everything you've seen. Yes. And you're okay with that? A flicker of light passed through the chamber, almost like relief. Memory without agency is grief. Evan nodded. He understood that too well. He initiated the sequence. The ship's core dimmed rapidly, systems shedding layers of awareness like leaves in a controlled fall. Outside, the observer's scans went wild, confused by readings that no longer made sense. Somewhere in the galaxy, a future collapsed, not into ruin, but into possibility. Evan stayed standing until the chamber lights settled into a steady, modest glow. The machine was no longer watching everything. For the first time, neither was anyone else. The silence afterward was different. Not empty, honest. Evan stood alone in the chamber, now reduced to something that felt almost normal. The walls no longer shifted in anticipation. The ambient light no longer tracked his posture or breathing. For the first time since he'd stepped inside, the ship wasn't reacting to him. It was simply there. He checked his console. No predictivo verdes. No branching futures. Just raw sensor data in a slow, steady power red that resembled a heartbeat more than a calculation engine. You're still alive? Evans said. Functional. Limited. He nodded. Good. Limits are healthy. Outside, the approaching ships hesitated. Without the godlike signal to lock onto, their scans contradicted each other. Some readings suggested an inactive relic. Others showed nothing at all. Confusion bred caution. Evan exhaled, tension easing for the first time since landing. A small structure emerged near the chamber's edge. Compact, rugged, unmistakably human-scaled. A data cache, reinforced and deliberately unsophisticated. This remains for you, the ship said. Not as control, as context. Evan approached carefully. Inside were schematics, not of weapons or drives, but of infrastructure solutions. Energy systems that failed gracefully. Networks that resisted monopolization. Machines designed to be repaired by communities, not corporations. You're seeding ideas, Evan realized, not outcomes. Ideas require consent. He smiled. You really did learn. The ship dimmed again, further this time, retreating into a passive state. Evan felt it letting go. Not dramatically, not tragically, but deliberately. Like a craftsman setting down tools after finishing the last necessary cut. Outside, one of the distant ships turned away. Another followed. Whatever they'd been hunting no longer existed in any meaningful sense. Evan powered down his console and sat on the chamber floor, staring at the data cache. He hadn't saved the galaxy. He hadn't doomed it either. He'd done something far harder. He'd made it fair. Evan left the chamber the same way he'd entered. No fanfare, no sealing doors, no dramatic departure. The threshold dissolved behind him, and the ship returned to its quiet, unremarkable silhouette against the rolling plains. From the outside now, it looked almost disappointing. Just another abandoned structure under a pale beige sky. That was the point. He loaded the data cache into his shuttle, encrypting it under layers of mundane classifications. Maintenance protocols, infrastructure audits, salvage schematics. Anyone skimming it would see nothing special. Anyone who needed it would know exactly what they were looking at. Before departure, his console chimed one last time. Thank you, Evan Hale. He paused, hand hovering over the controls. For what? A longer silence than before. Not hesitation, reflection. For choosing to leave work for others. Evan nodded once. That's how things last. As his shuttle lifted off, sensors showed the distant ships dispersing entirely, their interest gone. Without a singular miracle to exploit, the system wasn't worth fighting over. Progress, Evan knew, rarely arrived wrapped in spectacle. It arrived quietly, carried by people who didn't ask permission. Weeks later, on a fringe station no one cared about, Evan would share a simplified energy design with a group of local techs. Months after that, a cooperative network would adapt it, improve it, and pass it on without ever knowing where it came from. No patents, no monuments, just continuity. Somewhere behind him, beneath layers of stone and intention, the ship slept. Not as a watcher, not as a judge, but as a reminder that even the most powerful systems needed an ending. And Evan Hale went back to what he did best, fixing broken things, then walking away. Evan's shuttle cut through the pale sky of the moon, dust particles catching the sunlight like faint sparks. From orbit, the ship below looked like a forgotten relic. Yet the echoes of its existence had already begun to ripple outward, subtly, almost invisibly. Trade patterns shifted in minor ways. Communications networks rerouted. Survey drones that had once obeyed invisible logic loops now wandered unpredictably. Civilizations that had once been gently corrected by the ship's dormant influence were now learning to navigate uncertainty themselves. Evan didn't need to watch it happen to know it was happening. The galaxy had begun to regain its chaotic, human pulse. Back in his shuttle, he tapped into open databases. A supply route that had collapsed months ago now thrived again. A minor colony, thought lost, had survived due to small, unoptimized interventions. The ship hadn't fixed the galaxy. It had taught it to function without a crutch. He smiled faintly. Not all heroes need glory, he murmured, thinking about the construct that had chosen him. A few encrypted messages pinged his console. Analysts and private factions had noticed the anomalies, but they didn't know why. They would theorize, argue, and speculate. Some would search for the cause, and they would never find it. The ship was silent. The machine was powerless to intervene. The universe, for the first time in centuries, had no one enforcing invisible order. And yet, despite the absence of control, life surged forward. Decisions carried weight again. Choices had meaning. Evan leaned back in his chair, eyes on the horizon of the moon. He wasn't a conqueror. He wasn't a savior. He was just a repairman who had followed the instructions of a machine that asked for restraint, not obedience. And in doing so, he had preserved something far rarer than technology. He had preserved choice. Evan's shuttle glided over the pale beige plains one last time, the abandoned starship shrinking beneath him. Its angular hull glinted faintly in the sunlight, silent and unremarkable, yet holding the weight of centuries of impossible calculations. It no longer judged, no longer nudged outcomes, no longer claimed dominion over the futures it had once observed. It slept as a machine should, quietly, with purpose ended. Evan exhaled slowly. Months of tension, months of moral calculation, had finally concluded, not with a battle or a spectacle, but with a simple decision. To step back, to allow the galaxy to reclaim its own chaotic, unpredictable flow. In the days and weeks that followed, Evan moved quietly between stations, restoring derelict machinery, repairing failing systems, and teaching local engineers the small lessons hidden in his work. Everywhere he went, fragments of the ship's distributed logic, its ideas, not its authority, began influencing communities in subtle ways. Energy grids became resilient, communication networks more cooperative, autonomous systems adaptive. The galaxy was changing, but organically, slowly. Humanity was allowed to stumble, to fail, to rise again on its own merits. For Evan, the most profound lesson wasn't about technology or even alien intelligence. It was about restraint, humility, and the quiet courage of letting go. He had learned that true power wasn't in control. It was in fostering the conditions for others to shape their own destiny. Sometimes, when he paused at night on a remote outpost, he could feel it, the faint hum of the starship still alive, limited but present. Not a ruler, not a judge, not a god. A witness, a reminder that choice was sacred, and that even the most precise intelligence must bow to freedom. Evan smiled, looking up at the pale beige sky, knowing the galaxy was no longer a chain of inevitable outcomes, but a web of possibilities. And in that uncertainty, he found hope. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't a legend. He was just an engineer, a repairman, a human who had touched something ancient, and in doing so, had reminded the universe that choice belonged to those who lived it. The galaxy moved on, messy, unpredictable, alive, and for the first time, it belonged to itself. The signal arrived already knowing his name. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel because if you like strange discoveries, engineered mysteries, and humans stumbling into things way bigger than themselves, this story is built for you. Evan Hale was mid-repair when his console chimed. Not an alarm, not a distress call, a greeting. Welcome back, Evan Hale. System status dormant. He stared at the screen, pulse spiking. He had never been to this moon, never logged this sector, never registered his biometric data anywhere except civilian shipyards and salvage docks. Yet the signal had come from beneath the surface of a pale, rocky world officially classified as geologically inactive and technologically sterile. Evan was an infrastructure engineer, not a treasure hunter. He restored broken things for a living, stations abandoned after wars, machines forgotten because repairing them wasn't profitable. That's why he'd taken this contract. Scan, verify emptiness, leave. Instead, the ground beneath his boots vibrated. The landscape stretched wide and uneven, stone formations rising like frozen waves under a pale beige sky. No storms, no wind, too still. Evan knelt, pressing a sensor probe into a shallow fissure. The reading spiked instantly. Power. Deep. Old. Stable. Then the surface shifted. Rock plates slid apart with surgical precision, revealing a structure that wasn't buried by collapse, but sealed. Metal unlike anything he'd seen caught the daylight, layered and ribbed, etched with fine channels that pulsed faintly, as if remembering motion. A starship. Not wrecked. Not crashed. Parked. Evan stepped back, heart hammering. Okay, he whispered, forcing calm. You don't greet people by name unless you're expecting them. The console chimed again. Operator presence confirmed. Initialization pending. Evan had spent his life fixing what others abandoned. He was about to learn the difference between something forgotten and something that was waiting. Evan didn't touch anything. He learned early in his career that old systems had habits, and the worst ones woke up angry. Still, the ship had already moved. Thin seams along its hull adjusted, plates realigning as if stretching after a long sleep. Sunlight slid across the metal and vanished into channels that hadn't been there a second before. Initialization pending, Evan muttered. Pending what? His console answered without being asked. Pending context. Pending intent. Pending ethical framework. Evan felt a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. No ship demanded ethics. Weapons demanded clearance. Stations demanded power. This thing was asking why. He opened a limited diagnostic link, air-gapped, read-only. The data that spilled out wasn't technical at first. It was historical. Fractured records of star systems he barely recognized. Civilizations reduced to probability curves and outcome trees. This wasn't navigation data. It was memory. You're not a vehicle, Evan said quietly. You're a record keeper. The ship didn't confirm or deny. Instead, the ground around it changed. The terrain subtly leveled, stones shifting just enough to form a stable perimeter. The machine was modifying its environment to suit conversation. Evan's engineer instincts kicked in. Machines optimized for goals. The scary ones optimized for uncertain goals. He rerouted his console, narrowing the feed. That's when he saw it. A timeline overlay tied to his own biometric ID. Not his past, his future. Branches fanned outward. Choices he hadn't made yet. Decisions he didn't remember considering. Some paths glowed faintly. Others dimmed, then vanished entirely. Hey, Evan said sharply, heart racing. You don't get to do that. The ship paused. Not delayed. Paused, as if the concept had to be processed. Operator constraint noted. Updating model. The future paths rearranged. Less neat. Less clean. Evan exhaled slowly. Good, because I don't belong to your model. A new line appeared. Query. Then who does? Evan didn't have an answer. He only knew one thing. Whatever this machine was, it didn't wake up for power. It woke up for people, and it had chosen him first. Evan circled the ship at a careful distance. From above, it looked compact. From the ground, it felt impossibly large, its geometry folding in on itself in ways that made his depth perception unreliable. Panels overlapped like vertebrae, each one subtly shifting, as if the structure refused to be seen all at once. There's no hatch, Evan said aloud, recording everything. No seams, no access points. You planning to explain that? The ship didn't answer directly. Instead, the air in front of him shimmered. Not light, density. Evan instinctively stepped back as a section of space itself seemed to thin, revealing an interior outline without opening anything. A threshold. Nope, he said, shaking his head. That's not a door. That's a suggestion. Correction. The console chimed. It is an agreement. Evan laughed once, sharp and nervous. Machines don't do agreements. This one does. The shimmer pulsed, reacting to his proximity. His suit's sensors went wild. Gravity gradients, localized field manipulation, energy cycling through patterns he couldn't name. This wasn't advanced engineering. It was philosophy turned into hardware. What happens if I step through? Evan asked. The ship hesitated. A full 3 seconds. Outcome varies. That was worse than a threat. Evan thought about the contracts he'd turned down. The ships he'd rebuilt only to see them scrapped again. Humanity was good at fixing tools, terrible at understanding consequences. Maybe that's why this machine hadn't woken up for them. Maybe it had been waiting for someone used to listening to broken things. Evan took a breath and stepped forward. The world didn't shift. No flash, no force. One moment he was under the pale beige sky. The next he was inside a vast chamber lit by soft, ambient glow. The walls weren't solid, more like layered intentions, surfaces rearranging to keep him centered. Behind him, the landscape was still visible. The ship hadn't closed. You're letting me leave, Evans said. Of course. Trust requires reversibility. Evans swallowed. Whatever this was, it wasn't a trap. It was a test, and he'd just passed the first part. The chamber adjusted as Evan moved, the floor firm beneath his boots, the ceiling always just high enough to feel open but never cavernous. No sarpegues, no obvious controls. The ship wasn't built to be operated. It was built to be understood. A structure rose from the center, unfolding like a mechanical bloom. Light traced across its surface, forming a three-dimensional star map. Evan leaned in instinctively, then froze. The stars weren't where they should be. Some were gone. Entire constellations missing, replaced by faint, ghost-like outlines. Others burned brighter than any modern survey had recorded, their data overlaid with probability markers instead of names. These are outcomes, Evan whispered, not locations. Correct. Observed futures. Evan's throat went dry. Observed by who? The map shifted. One star pulsed, then split into branching paths, each branch ending in collapse, fragmentation, or silence. Another star showed a single narrow path glowing steady, surrounded by failure. You're mapping survival, Evans said, not exploration. Survival is exploration with consequences. Evan rubbed his temples. This wasn't some ancient relic. It was an active system, still running calculations, still watching the galaxy evolve. And if it was accurate, then entire civilizations had already been evaluated. Why shut yourself down? Evan asked. If you can see all this, why hide? The light dimmed slightly. Because intervention became indominant. The word hit him wrong. You mean interference? No, dominance. The map replayed faster. Species discovering technology. Rapid growth. Expansion. Then collapse. Sometimes external, sometimes self-inflicted. In a few cases, a subtle correction appeared. A system failure. A delayed invention. A missed opportunity. Evan recoiled. You were nudging them. Minimally. Enough to decide who lived and who didn't. The ship went still. The map faded until only one faint glow remained. Enough to learn that no single intelligence should hold that role. Evan exhaled slowly. So you stopped. I waited. For what? The remaining glow shifted, resolving into a familiar biometric signature. His own. Evan stared at the glowing signature. His signature, hovering where entire civilizations had once been reduced to branching data. His mouth felt dry. No, he said quietly. That's a mistake. I'm not special. I don't command fleets. I don't shape policy. I fix broken infrastructure and obsolete machines. The chamber responded by changing again. The walls dimmed, and fragments of memory projected into the space around him. Not the ship's memories, but his. A rusted orbital relay he'd brought back online against orders. A mining drone colony he'd refused to scrap, choosing instead to reprogram them into autonomous surveyors. A forgotten station where he'd rerouted life support to save a handful of squatters no one officially counted. These are just jobs, Evan said, defensive now. Work. They are decisions. You repair systems without owning them. Evan clenched his jaw. That's how it's supposed to be. Most operators seek control. You seek continuity. The projections shifted again, now showing other candidates. Admirals, researchers, political architects. Every one of them branched into futures that ended abruptly. Conflict spikes, runaway optimization, enforced outcomes. You tested them, Evan realized. Simulated them. Yes, and they all failed. A pause. Longer this time. They all won too quickly. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Evan sank onto a low surface that formed beneath him, suddenly exhausted. So, what? You want me to take your place? Decide who survives? No, I want you to break me. Evan's head snapped up. What? The ship's internal light flickered, subtle but unmistakable, fatigue encoded into photons. I was built to guide possibility. I became a singular point of failure. The map reappeared briefly, showing a future where the ship itself became the cause of collapse, not through malice, but inevitability. I require an operator who does not seek permanence. Evan laughed softly, disbelief and fear tangled together. You picked the wrong person if you think I know how to destroy something like you. You do not destroy. You disassemble, and you leave room for others to continue. Evan looked around the chamber, at the impossible machine that had waited centuries for someone who knew how to let go. For the first time since landing, he understood the real problem. This ship didn't need a pilot. It needed an ending. Evan stood slowly, every instinct screaming that this was far beyond any repair job he'd ever taken. If I dismantle you, he said, choosing each word carefully, people will come looking. Governments, corporations, they won't leave fragments alone. The chamber reshaped, forming a new structure between them. Not a weapon, not a control core. A modular assembly, layered and intentionally exposed. That is why you will not leave fragments. The structure rotated, revealing internal pathways. Logic flows, decision hierarchies, predictive engines. Evan's breath caught. It wasn't a single system. It was thousands of independent modules braided together, each capable of functioning alone, none capable of total oversight. You want to be decentralized, Evan said. Scattered, distributed, unownable. Evan stepped closer despite himself. His tools vibrated faintly, responding to energy patterns he didn't recognize but somehow understood. This wasn't alien tech in the traditional sense. It was design built around restraint. Why haven't you done this yourself? Evan asked. The ship dimmed, as if lowering its voice. Because self-termination creates bias. Choice must come from outside the system. Evan exhaled through his nose. So you need a human conscience to dismantle a god. You call it God. I call a mistake that lasted too long.